The latest quarterly employment statistics to be released by StatsSA later today is expected to paint a clearer and more current picture of the labour landscape in South Africa. The data from StatsSA follows positive economic readings, including the 0.4% growth in GDP, along with the consecutive drop in the unemployment rate to 32.7%. Labour analyst Andrew Levy joins us now to expand on this conversation. Good morning to you, Andrew. I think let's first start by unbunking the differences between the quarterly labour force survey as well as the quarterly employment statistics. What are the differences there?
Good morning. The fundamental method of data collection is different. The QLFS, Quarterly Labour Force Survey, is done by a sort of on the hoof, as it were, a household survey. So people go out or they telephone and they ask people questions, they tick the responses, and they submit all the results. Okay, so it's a survey of people who are out there, and are you working, are you looking for a job, are you unemployed, what do you do, what do you bring home, etc., etc. Whereas the quarterly earnings survey is based on data submitted back to SARS, payroll data, which reflects the earnings as reported by the employer, obviously for purposes of PAYE tax. So they are opposite sides of the same coin. The one is getting the reading from the workers themselves, the other is getting the reading from the employer. Now, obviously, it would be foolish to expect both surveys to yield the same result. In any event, the sampling differences and difficulties are vast. But of course, what the earnings survey will not record are people who are working outside of the tax net, people who are illegals, and of course people in the informal sector who don't pay tax at all. Those are the fundamental differences, but one needs both to get some notion of what is happening in the labour market.
On that note, Andrew, the QLFS saw some improvement, and it was a consecutive reading of that particular positive data. What's expected this time around in the QES?
Well, I think one needs to be very, very careful about short-term data on the labour market. People come in, people go out, and there's a constant churning over of the number of people. So it's very difficult to judge the number of people in employment increasing without looking at the number of people who are falling out. Now, if one takes the first quarter of any year, one would expect, in point of fact, the number of employed to go down overall, because the 1st of January, the start of the first quarter, sees a lot of school leavers, a lot of university graduates coming into the labour market. So there's a sudden surge in labour supply, and it takes the labour market time to respond to take up that surge in supply, and by and large it doesn't. So the more important figure, as far as I am concerned, is a figure called labour market absorption rate. That is given in the QLFS. It's a vitally important statistic, and what that tells us is what percentage of new entrants to the labour market are going to find a job. And that is a very disappointing figure. The last time I looked at it, it was around about 38, 39%, which means nearly 60% of people entering the market won't find a job. But to come back to the positive side, the other thing is that sometimes the increases in employment are seasonal. The data is not seasonally adjusted. So, for example, we find that in December, the leisure industry hires a lot of people, and at the end of January, they terminate them. They're on fixed-term contracts. We find agriculture, and that is one of the sectors where one would expect growth, will fluctuate with the crop season. Are they growing? Are they cutting? Are they processing? Are they sowing? And so on and so forth. So all in all, whilst we may see increases, we need to also ask, where are those increases? Now, if you look at the heart of the economy, if you're looking at mining, metals, motors, manufacturing, unfortunately, those all tend to show a reducing trend. So it may well be that on the periphery, people are coming in, but overall, as people come into employment or into the labour market, we can absorb fewer and fewer of them. The unemployment rate tends to go up. It goes down a little bit, but if you look at the longer-term trend, it's going up. And what this indicates is that we still have a very, very severe and pressing unemployment problem. But one must say that every job gain is a win. It's another family who have a breadwinner. It's another person who has the self-respect of saying, I am an earner, I'm working, I'm bringing home food for myself and my family, and that is such a positive thing and so good for our society. We should all strive for that.
That absorption side of the coin, Andrew, also speaks directly to which industries are taking in, particularly young people in South Africa, because youth unemployment remains stubbornly high. Outside of the traditional mining, manufacturing and the retail space, who else is hiring in South Africa?
Well, there is not a great deal of hiring going on, I'm afraid to say. As I said, we normally expect the agricultural sector, the informal sector. Jobs do grow at the highly skilled end of the labour market. So, we're always looking for qualified accountants, medical doctors, technicians, engineers are in constant demand. But, we may well have an oversupply. So even if one has one of those degrees, it's still competitive. But for the rest, I think the overall picture is, if you take a look at the longer term, is a very worrying one.
Lastly, we know that this data is going to indicate earnings in South Africa. What's the expectation there? Because many South Africans have been indicating that salary increases have not been, a mandatory in this country, particularly in the COVID period and post that.
Yes. Well, obviously incomes and earnings took a huge dip in COVID with the shutdown, with people working part-time, etc., etc. And it's doubtful if we have retained the previous level. At the same time, we have been plagued by a highly inflationary period. I'm pleased to say it appears to be abating, and all the economists, myself included, tend to take the view that it will ease off. Now, on the one hand, we still have trade unions who are bargaining for their members, who do very well for them, tending to get above inflationary increases, but the margin comes down, and so the buffer in terms of keeping up with rising prices gets smaller and smaller. And I think it's fair to say that many companies are still retrenching, they are still working short time, we are still in a difficult economic period, low demand, output decreases, and so people may be employed but may not be working full hours. So I would anticipate that the overall level of earnings will go down somewhat, or at best will stay where it was in the last survey, which is certainly down on the pre-COVID level. So there's no doubt that South African households are facing an income crunch and a price increase crunch, and that things are very difficult out there.
Thank you, as always, for your contribution. Labour analyst Andrew Levy there talking to us in anticipation of the latest data from StatsSA expected later today in the form of the quarterly employment statistics.